I'm going to post a quick video here just to share some thoughts in response to David Long's recent video challenging idealists to remove the sword from the stone by, as he puts it, giving a ground-up case for the accuracy of their point of view. I'm not directly responding to David's challenge because I'm not an idealist and share some of his criticisms of the idealistic point of view. But I also think that David is unwittingly strengthening the idealist orientation by resting his own arguments on an idealistic epistemological foundation. So while explicitly he claims to be demolishing the idealistic approach, implicitly, without realizing it, he is in fact basing his approach on idealism. So he says in the beginning of his argument, laying out his supposedly ground-up case for the emergence of consciousness from matter, that we have to begin with this Cartesian premise, I think, therefore I am. Descartes actually initially articulates this as I think, comma, I am in the context of his meditations on first philosophy, so it's less a sort of logical deduction as the therefore that he adds in a later book might make it seem. It's more of a phenomenological account, as he saw it, of the relationship between his own thinking and his embodied sensory experience. So he says, I think I am. There's a relationship for Descartes between his own thinking and his own existence, right? Fair enough. The problem with the whole Cartesian framework, though, and David displays this, is that if we accept as an epistemological foundation that we begin as independent, autonomous thinking egos, then we have to derive the existence of other minds and the world itself through an act of logical inference, right? As if we, as human beings, don't have any immediate empathic sense, or as if we don't come into the world already in sympathetic resonance with other people in a pre-reflective way, as if infants are born into the world with a rational ego and have to, through a series of logical deductions, come to believe in the existence of their mother. So I think it's just inaccurate and overly abstract to imagine that our basic epistemological situation is as Descartes imagined. Descartes' meditations are, in some sense, a kind of nightmare that the modern Western world has been struggling to wake up from for several centuries now, because this is not our basic epistemological situation. I think we don't begin as thinking substances. We begin as feeling creatures in empathic resonance with other people and the world, right? And so, for me, epistemology has to be set in the context of what I would call a radical empiricist approach. This comes out of the work of thinkers like William James. Alfred North Whitehead builds on this. The names are not really important. The point is that feeling, rather than like concrete feelings of relationship, are the epistemological foundation, if you want to use that term, foundation. I would prefer to think of it not as a foundation so much as a sort of heuristic starting point. We begin with feeling and we can build up our abstract models of how reality works upon that basis, rather than beginning with abstract thoughts, supposedly inhering in some thinking substance, as Descartes had it. We don't need to logically deduce the existence of other minds. We come into the world already in internal relationship with others, right, and with the rest of the world. So when it comes to the rest of David's case for the emergence of consciousness from the material or physical universe, I generally agree with this story of the gradual complexification of organized systems in the course of the evolution of the universe. The problem, of course, is the gap between matter as it has been conceptualized in David's framework and consciousness as it has been conceptualized in David's framework. And David seems unable or unwilling to think outside of the context of his prefabricated categories. There are alternative approaches to this problem space than just standard physicalism or standard idealism. The panpsychist, or I think better for my purposes, pan-experientialist point of view falls into neither of these neat boxes. The pan-experientialist accepts with David that consciousness, as human beings know and love it, is not the basic substratum of reality, does not go all the way down in any evolutionary sense. Consciousness, again, the sort of rational, reflective consciousness that human beings experience, is itself, I would say, rather rare in nature. It's an evolutionarily late addition to organic life. I think probably many of the higher mammals also have consciousness, probably some birds. It's ontologically speaking, though, this type of consciousness is, I would say, kind of superficial and kind of derivative, kind of, not something that we should be looking to for our ontological primitives, right? Now, on the other hand, I think it's important to make a distinction between conscious, reflective experience of the sort that human beings enjoy, at least some of the time, and other forms of experience which are not strictly speaking conscious, right? Even for human beings, most of the time, at least a third of our lives is spent asleep and dreaming. Even in our waking lives, we are, our minds are wandering, our thoughts are all over the place. We're not attentive in a reflective, rational, conscious way. And so I think we need to accept that there's a whole spectrum of experience, and that certainly, and maybe David would agree here, all organic beings down to single cells have some form of experience, or we could use the word sentience here if you want. There's something it's like to be them. They have the capacity to sense and respond to the environment in an adaptive way. So there's some interiority present even in single cells. Right now, and admittedly this is a speculative hypothesis, but in order to overcome the gap that still remains, even if we push non-conscious experience all the way down to single cells, there's still this gap between physics and chemistry and the first living cell that I think is wide enough to warrant a speculative hypothesis that perhaps some form of experience does indeed go all the way down, that any form of physical organization as such, from protons and electrons to atoms to stars and galaxies, has some degree of interiority, some capacity for experience, some experiential horizon. Now, we shouldn't anthropomorphize that experiential horizon by imagining that it is, capable of the sorts of reflective thought and imaginative freedom and all the things that, we as human beings are capable of. But nonetheless, there is some degree of interiority that goes all the way down. And I think this, again, speculative hypothesis helps us articulate a cosmology that doesn't have any huge gaps in it. Because again, although David will assert the authority of capital S science in defending an emergentist understanding of consciousness, that, either it comes out of the right connections among a bunch of neurons, or it comes out of the right assembly of a bunch of molecules into cells, wherever, the leap occurs. It's true that materialistic scientists will, as a philosophical presupposition, say that consciousness emerges from matter, but there's no theoretical articulation of the mechanism by which extended material objects could all of a sudden give rise to an entirely new ontological domain of interior experience. David hasn't told us how this might work. I haven't seen any materialistic neuroscientists tell us how this might work. There's just a sort of IOU that's offered. And the thing is, it's not a scientific finding that consciousness emerges from matter. It is a presupposition, a philosophical presupposition that guides a certain research program, right? So that's it. Just wanted to share those ideas. Curious to hear folks what you think, and let's continue the conversation. I would love it if we could have a philosophical conversation rather than an ad hominem flame war, but we'll see what happens.
Enough said.